Welcome to Disruptarian, the podcast where we tackle today's most pressing social issues with no filter and all heart. I'm your host, Rich Garvey Banton, and today we're diving deep into a topic that affects millions of families around the world: parental alienation. You might have heard the term tossed around, but what does it really mean? How does it impact fathers' rights, children's well-being, and the families caught in the middle? And more importantly, what are the emotional, legal, and social consequences of this growing issue? Joining me today are three individuals who bring different perspectives to this sensitive and emotional topic. Dr. Sarah Mitchell, a psychologist who specializes in family dynamics, is here to provide some factual context. Tom Daniels, a father who has personally experienced parental alienation, is with us to share his story. And Maria Roberts, who has a different perspective, will offer a counterpoint to the issue. Let's dive right in. All right, so to kick things off, let's define parental alienation. Dr. Mitchell, can you start by explaining what exactly parental alienation is and why it's such a contentious issue today?
Certainly, Rich. Parental alienation occurs when one parent, often after a divorce or separation, manipulates the child into rejecting the other parent. This can be done subtly, through negative comments, or more overtly, by cutting off contact. It's important to note that while this behavior can happen with both fathers and mothers, studies show it's more commonly the father who is alienated, particularly in custody battles. The psychological impact on the child can be devastating: long-term emotional damage, confusion about familial loyalty, and even future relationship issues.
So it's not just the parents who suffer, but the kids as well?
Absolutely. The child becomes a pawn in a conflict they didn't create. They may experience guilt, shame, and anxiety from being forced to choose sides or rejecting a parent they once loved. This can lead to a range of psychological issues, including depression, low self-esteem, and difficulty forming healthy relationships later in life.
And how prevalent is this issue, Dr. Mitchell?
While it's difficult to get exact numbers, studies suggest that parental alienation occurs in about 11 to 15% of divorces involving children. That's a significant number of families affected. What's particularly concerning is that many cases go unreported or unrecognized, so the actual number could be much higher.
That's quite alarming. Can you tell us about some of the warning signs that parental alienation might be occurring?
Certainly. Some red flags include a child suddenly expressing unwarranted negative feelings towards one parent, parroting adult language or concerns, or refusing to spend time with a parent they previously had a good relationship with. Other signs can be more subtle, like one parent consistently speaking poorly of the other in front of the child or interfering with communication between the child and the other parent.
Thank you for that comprehensive explanation, Dr. Mitchell. Now, Tom, I understand you've personally experienced parental alienation. Can you give us a brief introduction to your story?
Yeah, I went from being a dad who saw his kids every weekend to being completely shut out. It was slow at first. Missed calls, canceled plans, but then it became clear my ex was turning them against me. It's like losing your kids while they're still alive. It's heartbreaking.
Can you elaborate a bit on how this affected your relationship with your children?
Sure, Rich. Before the divorce, I had a great relationship with my kids. We'd go to the park, watch movies together, just normal dad stuff. But after the separation, things changed dramatically. My ex-wife started making excuses for why the kids couldn't see me. Then when I did get to see them, they seemed distant, almost afraid of me. It was like they'd been told I was a different person entirely.
Tom, can you tell us more about your experience with parental alienation? What were some of the specific behaviors or incidents that made you realize what was happening?
It started subtly, Rich. At first, I noticed my kids were less enthusiastic about our weekend visits. They'd make excuses not to come over or cut our time short. Then I started hearing things that raised red flags. My daughter once said, "Mom says you left us because you don't love us anymore." It was heartbreaking because I'd never said or done anything to suggest that. As time went on, the alienation became more blatant. My ex-wife would schedule activities during my visitation time without consulting me. She'd tell the kids I had canceled plans when I hadn't. When I tried to call, she'd say they were busy or didn't want to talk to me. The worst part was watching my children's attitudes towards me change. They became cold, distant. My son, who used to love playing catch with me, suddenly said he hated sports. It felt like my ex was systematically erasing every connection I had with my kids. I tried to talk to my ex about it, but she'd accuse me of being paranoid or trying to control her. When I suggested family therapy, she refused, saying I was the problem, not her or the kids. It was incredibly frustrating and isolating.
That sounds incredibly difficult, Tom. Maria, I can see you want to respond. What's your perspective on this kind of situation?
I understand Tom's pain. I really do. But I think it's crucial to recognize that there are situations where limiting contact with a parent is necessary for the child's well-being. In my case, my ex-husband had anger management issues that he refused to address. He would yell at the kids for minor things, making them anxious and fearful. I tried for years to get him to seek help, to modify his behavior, but he always insisted he was fine, and I was overreacting. It reached a point where my children were having nightmares and panic attacks before his visits. As a mother, I had to make the difficult decision to restrict his access until he got help. From the outside, I'm sure it looked like I was alienating him from the kids, but my priority was protecting them from emotional harm. It wasn't about punishing my ex or turning the kids against him. It was about creating a safe environment for them to grow and thrive.
So you're saying there's a fine line between alienation and protection.
Exactly. It's not always black and white. Sometimes, what looks like alienation is actually a parent trying to shield their children from a harmful situation. That's why these cases are so complex, and why it's crucial not to jump to conclusions without understanding the full context.
Tom, how do you respond to Maria's perspective? Do you think there's a way to differentiate between alienation and legitimate concerns for a child's welfare?
I appreciate Maria's point, and I agree that child safety should always come first. In my situation, though, there were no abuse or anger issues. I was an involved, loving father before the divorce, and nothing about my behavior changed. The alienation seemed to stem purely from my ex-wife's anger about the divorce. I think the key difference is whether there's a genuine threat to the child's well-being, and whether the parent restricting access is open to finding solutions. In my case, my ex refused all attempts at mediation or co-parenting counseling. That's what made me realize this wasn't about protecting the kids, but about punishing me.
This seems fairly typical from other stories that I have heard, Tom. Dr. Mitchell, I want to turn back to you. Given what Tom and Maria have shared, how does parental alienation impact children in the long term?
The psychological effects of parental alienation on children can be profound and long-lasting, Rich. Children caught in these situations often develop a range of emotional and behavioral issues that can persist well into adulthood. One of the most significant impacts is on their ability to form and maintain healthy relationships. Having experienced a breakdown in trust with a parent, they may struggle to trust others or form deep emotional connections later in life. We often see these children developing low self-esteem and a distorted self-image. They might internalize the conflict, believing they're somehow responsible for the family breakdown or that they're unworthy of love. This can lead to depression, anxiety, and in some cases, even substance abuse as they get older. Another crucial aspect is the impact on their identity formation. Children naturally identify with both parents, and when they're forced to reject one parent, it's like rejecting a part of themselves. This internal conflict can lead to a fragmented sense of self and difficulties in personal development. Moreover, these children often struggle with guilt. They may feel torn between loyalties, experiencing guilt for loving the alienated parent or for not loving them enough. This emotional turmoil can manifest in various ways, from academic struggles to difficulties in social situations.
Tom, I know you have dealt with a lot in your situation. Have you noticed any of these side effects in your own children?
Unfortunately, yes, Rich. It's been heartbreaking to witness. My oldest, who's now 15, has become increasingly withdrawn over the years. He used to be such an outgoing kid, but now he struggles to maintain friendships. I've noticed he has a hard time trusting people, and he's always second-guessing himself. What really kills me is seeing how he struggles with his own identity. There are times when I see glimpses of the bond we used to have, but then it's like he catches himself and puts up this wall. I can tell he's conflicted, and it's clear he's carrying a lot of guilt and confusion. My younger daughter, she's 12 now, she's developed anxiety. She gets panic attacks before school and has trouble sleeping. It's like she's always on edge, afraid of disappointing someone or making the wrong choice. I worry about how this will affect them as they grow older and start forming their own relationships.
Maria, as a mother, do you worry about this too, or is there a way to balance protecting your kids while still allowing them access to both parents?
Of course I worry, Rich. It keeps me up at night. In my situation, I felt I had to limit contact to protect my children. But I'm acutely aware of the potential consequences. I've seen my kids struggle with conflicting emotions. They love their father, but they're also afraid of him based on past experiences. I try to be open and honest with them, encouraging them to express their feelings. We've been in family therapy, which has been helpful. But I do see signs of what Dr. Mitchell mentioned. My son has anger issues, and my daughter is overly anxious about pleasing others. It's a delicate balance. I want to shield them from harm, but I also recognize their need for a relationship with their father. I'm doing my best to navigate this complex situation, always putting their emotional well-being first. My hope is that as they mature, they'll understand the choices I've made, and we can work towards healing as a family.
It's clear that there's no easy solution, and the impact on children is significant regardless of the circumstances. Dr. Mitchell, are there any strategies parents can employ to mitigate these psychological effects? For the alienated parent, persistence and patience are vital. Continuing to show love and support, even when it's not reciprocated, can make a difference in the long run. And for all involved, focusing on the child's needs rather than parental conflict is essential.
Remember, healing is possible. With the right support and approach, children can overcome the effects of parental alienation and go on to form healthy relationships and lead fulfilling lives.
Now let's touch on the legal side of things. The law often seems to side with one parent over the other, and fathers frequently find themselves on the losing end. Tom, what was your experience with the courts?
It was a nightmare, Rich. I felt like I was fighting an uphill battle the entire time. Even when I had evidence of alienation, it wasn't enough. The courts tend to favor mothers, and proving parental alienation is incredibly hard. I spent thousands on lawyers and still ended up with limited visitation rights. It's like the system is designed to work against fathers.
Dr. Mitchell, why is it so difficult to prove alienation in court?
There are several reasons, Rich. First, parental alienation is often subtle and occurs over time. It's hard to prove intent, and without concrete evidence, it can look like normal post-divorce conflict. Judges are cautious, and rightfully so, because they have to balance the best interests of the child. But in cases like Tom's, the system can end up perpetuating the alienation. Another challenge is that parental alienation isn't universally recognized in legal circles. Some courts are hesitant to consider it as a factor in custody decisions. There's also a lack of standardized criteria for identifying alienation, which makes it difficult for judges to make consistent rulings. Maria, do you think the legal system does enough to protect children? Or is it too lenient with cases like these? I think the system tries its best, but it's not perfect. I've seen cases where fathers were wrongly alienated, but I've also seen cases where mothers were villainized for protecting their kids. The law has to evolve to handle these nuances better. In my experience, the courts often struggle to distinguish between legitimate concerns for a child's safety and malicious attempts at alienation. It's a delicate balance, and I don't envy the judges who have to make these decisions.
Tom, did you feel like you had a fair chance to present your case?
Honestly, no, it felt like an uphill battle from the start. The burden of proof was entirely on me, and it's incredibly difficult to demonstrate the subtle ways alienation occurs. By the time I got my day in court, so much damage had already been done to my relationship with my kids.
Dr. Mitchell, are there any legal reforms you think could help address this issue?
Absolutely. We need more specialized training for judges and court-appointed evaluators on recognizing the signs of parental alienation. There should also be faster interventions when alienation is suspected, because time is critical in these cases. Additionally, I believe we need more emphasis on co-parenting education and mediation before cases escalate to court battles. Many parents don't realize the harm they're causing until it's too late.
Maria, from your perspective, how can the legal system better protect children while ensuring fairness for both parents?
I think we need a more holistic approach. Courts should consider a wider range of factors when making custody decisions, including the willingness of each parent to support the child's relationship with the other parent. We also need better mechanisms for addressing false allegations, whether they're about alienation or abuse. Ultimately, the focus needs to be on what's best for the child, not on winning or losing. That might mean more comprehensive evaluations, involving child psychologists and social workers in the decision-making process.
Tom, based on your experience, what changes would you like to see in how these cases are handled?
I'd like to see faster action when alienation is suspected. By the time my case was heard, my relationship with my kids was already severely damaged. I also think there should be consequences for parents who engage in alienation tactics. Right now, it feels like there's no downside for the alienating parent, even when it's proven.
As we approach the end of our discussion, I'd like to shift our focus towards solutions. We've heard about the devastating effects of parental alienation, but what can be done to prevent it? And for those already affected, how can we start the healing process? Dr. Mitchell, let's start with you. What do you see as the path forward?
The key to addressing parental alienation lies in education and early intervention. We need to raise awareness about the long-term damage this can cause to children. Parents going through separation or divorce should be required to attend workshops on co-parenting and the importance of maintaining healthy relationships with both parents. Additionally, family courts need to be better equipped to recognize and address alienation early on. This might involve specialized training for judges and court-appointed psychologists. Another crucial aspect is therapy. Family therapy that involves both parents and children can be incredibly effective in rebuilding relationships and establishing healthy communication patterns. It's also important for the alienated parent to have individual therapy to work through their own emotions and learn strategies for reconnecting with their children.
That's really insightful, Dr. Mitchell. Tom, as someone who's experienced this firsthand, what do you think needs to change?
I agree with Dr. Mitchell about education, but I also think we need stricter enforcement of custody agreements. In my case, even when I had court-ordered visitation, it wasn't always respected. There should be real consequences for parents who consistently interfere with the other parent's time with their children. I'd also like to see more support groups for alienated parents. It can be an incredibly isolating experience, and having a community that understands what you're going through can make a huge difference. These groups could also serve as a resource for legal advice and strategies for reconnecting with children. Lastly, I think we need to change the narrative around fatherhood. There's still this outdated idea that mothers are the primary caregivers, and that fathers are somehow less important. This bias plays out in custody battles and contributes to alienation. We need to recognize that both parents are equally valuable in a child's life.
Those are excellent points, Tom. Maria, I'm curious to hear your perspective on this. How do you think we can move forward while also addressing the concerns of parents who feel they need to limit contact for safety reasons?
I think the most important thing is to create a system that can distinguish between true cases of alienation and situations where limited contact is necessary for the child's well-being. This requires a more nuanced approach from the courts and mental health professionals. We also need better resources for families in conflict. Mediation services, for example, can help parents communicate more effectively and find solutions that work for everyone. And in cases where there are genuine concerns about a parent's behavior, we need clearer pathways for addressing those issues and working towards supervised visitation or other arrangements that prioritize the child's safety while maintaining a relationship with both parents. I also believe we need to focus on healing. Even in cases where alienation has occurred, there should be programs to help families rebuild relationships over time. This might involve gradual reintroduction therapy or other specialized approaches.
Thank you all for these thoughtful suggestions. It's clear that addressing parental alienation requires a multifaceted approach. Dr. Mitchell, any final thoughts on how we can start implementing some of these ideas?
Absolutely. I think the first step is to continue having conversations like this one, bringing awareness to the issue. We need to push for policy changes at both the state and federal levels to address parental alienation more effectively in the legal system. It's also crucial to invest in research to better understand the long-term impacts of alienation and develop more effective intervention strategies. And finally, we need to train more mental health professionals in this specific area so that families have access to specialized help when they need it.
That's all for today's episode of Disruptarian. We've covered a lot of ground on the complex issue of parental alienation. From Dr. Mitchell's expert insights to Tom and Maria's personal experiences, it's clear that this topic affects families in profound ways. Remember, if you're dealing with parental alienation, you're not alone. Reach out to support groups, consult with legal advisors, or seek help from a family therapist. These resources can provide valuable guidance and support. As we've learned today, there's no simple solution to parental alienation. It requires open communication, understanding, and a willingness to put children's needs first. Let's continue this important dialogue and work towards healing families affected by this issue. Thank you for listening to Disruptarian. Until next time, I'm Rich Garvey Banton, encouraging you to keep disrupting the status quo. We are streaming live 24/7, 365 at Disruptarian.com. Tune in for our homegrown roots reggae and new reggae Celtic fusion vibes.
Whispers in the dark, hearts filled with doubt. Daddy's just a shadow, drowned out by her shout. Mommy's venom strong, twist the love they had. Every word a hammer, turning hearts so sad. Broken threads of family, lost in lies and pain. Once we had a unity, now only tears remain. Betrayed eyes look at him, once filled with trust. Mom's painted poison pictures, turning love to dust. Betrayed eyes look at him, once filled with trust. Mom's painting poison pictures, turning